She is a child of war. Orphaned in the fire and rubble of Stalingrad, young Natalia Romanova was indoctrinated by the KGB and programmed as a weapon of the Soviet state. Her soul, burdened by the Cold War's bloody toll of deceit and death, a crisis of conscience awoke her indomitable will, and she chose the path of a hero. Her deadly skills now in the service of redemption, she dwells in shadow for the sake of us all. Natalia Romanova is the Black Widow.
This is Comic Geek Speak, episode 1753, Spotlight on the Black Widow.
Laser beams, opinions like the seasons on everything you read in comics, movies, games, toys, artists, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek. Uniting the world's mightiest heroes. This is...
I'm Chris Eberle.
I'm Ian Levinstein.
I'm Adam Murdo.
And I'm Shane Kelly.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. This episode has been a long time coming for two reasons. Number one,
And number
actually
two.
for three reasons. First of all, we're all in the studio together.
What?
It's been a long time.
I'm here? What?
Yes.
Number two, Ian Levinstein, for the first time in the history of the show,
Long-range teleportation.
Oh, seriously.
has brought his majestic tuchus into the CJ studio, and he already performed outstanding technical work to help get this episode up and running.
Now, first off, highly appreciate your use of Tuchus. That is immediately a bonus. And
Well, you're one of my favorite Jewish people.
Well, I am very happy to be here, gentlemen. It has been a long time coming, and I'm glad to get things up and running.
I can't believe you were never, ever here.
I was never here. I missed out twice. Both times I was supposed to get a tour. One time I got here like 5 minutes too late, and the other time we slept in. And that's it. I was at the old studio in Deemer's place.
Okay.
But I was never at this one.
That baffles me.
I know. But I feel like I'm here all the time.
Well, brother, welcome.
You've been here in spirit many, many times.
Hell yeah.
Indeed. And finally, I'm very pleased to announce that we're returning to the Spotlight format with this episode. It's been quite a while. The last one that Murd and I did on Namor the Submariner, I think it was in December of 2018.
It was, because I remember going to see Into the Spider-Verse right afterwards.
Yes.
But don't forget the spotlight on Shazam in the Bronze
Merge.
Age.
How could I forget the 5.5-hour recording session we had on
Murd, I want to
Shazam?
apologize profusely. I should have elaborated. This is my return to the Spotlight format.
Yes.
So,
Very happy to have you back at the rostrum, Professor.
thanks, brother. We're all here. Shane, it's damn good to see you.
forgot
As
the
I
apple.
clasp
You're
your
here.
forearm.
Yes.
And-
Here's my A.
I love how you kind of like your hand on your brow and like in resignation. Shane, it's all right. For a couple hours, you can just relax.
You either look like you're in resignation or you're like Professor Xavier calling up Cerebro.
To me, my X-Men.
Where are they? They have to be here. Where are they?
So I've been aching to get back to doing a spotlight for quite some time. Again, time, logistics have always made it difficult. But actually, this past summer, when I had more time, I did decide to put my sights on the Black Widow, a character we've mentioned many times in many other spotlights because she's been all over the Marvel Universe. But a character we've never given the spotlight treatment to, and considering not just only her obvious role in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but from our perspective, her incredibly important role in the history of the Marvel Universe in terms of the comic books. I thought it was well past time that we give this very important character her due.
Yeah.
In terms of the spotlight format. So, as is the case with previous spotlights, we're going to give you, let's call it a detailed overview of the character, her history within the stories, the creators behind the character, sort of the historical forces that were shaping her and the way she was portrayed. One of the interesting things about the Black Widow as I was going through my research is, and this happens with a lot of the female characters in Marvel, the way she's portrayed often depends on the cultural sensibilities of that time period. So, and the Black Widow goes through a lot of permutations throughout her publishing history, and we're going to explore that. And as I said, how connected she is, especially through retconning in the history of the Marvel Universe. Wolverine, Captain America, she pops up all over the place. And she's one of the most compelling characters in comics. I fell in love with the character when I first read her in Bronze Age issues of Daredevil back in I got them in the 80s, but from the stories from the 1970s. And I've been fascinated by the character ever since. I think it's a character who's also become so sophisticated as she's been portrayed throughout the years, especially in the hands of great writers like Mark Waid, for example, Greg Rucka. And we're going to talk about Frank Miller. We're going to talk about just what a pivotal role she's played as an espionage agent. We can't forget how dangerous this character is and how deadly she is, and also as an Avenger, and as a character who's always as a partner of Daredevil, and also as a character who's always trying to find redemption in many ways. So this is a discussion we're looking forward to for quite some time, gentlemen.
I feel like Black Widow and Wolverine could probably have a retcon off. Like, because they are definitely the two people that have been self-inserted into the most of the Marvel universe. I feel like
that's a good point. All right, let's first of all, again, it's so wonderful to have everybody here.
Amen.
I haven't been in the studio since we did our Born Again Book of the Month back in July, and that reminds me, we do have a Book of the Month on the docket upcoming. We mentioned DC New Frontier. That will be happening in the not-too-distant future.
Looking forward to it, and I'm definitely going to have to sit on the couch to read it because that Absolute is huge.
Oh, you have the Absolute edition?
I have the Absolute, yes. It is my Absolute edition.
I have a nice normal-sized hardback version.
I have issues.
Yes, you do.
Yes, you do. We know that.
Shocker.
You know, Murd, everything could be going to hell in this world, but the fact that there are certain constants that you bring to the table, I find them enormously reassuring. I'm going to drive home. Ian and I are going to be driving home tonight back to the New Jersey, New York area, and I'll have that sense of continuity and warmth, knowing that Murd will return to his domicile, and there'll be a stack of floppies next to that bed.
There's a stack of floppies next to everything in my apartment. Everything.
Everything?
Everything.
God, I'm glad he's here. All right, let's, per tradition, let's start with our initial impressions and thoughts and experience when it comes to the character, the Black Widow. Ian, why don't you start as you're our newbie in the studio here?
Alrighty. My experience with the Black Widow is mostly for her appearances on teams. Specifically the Avengers, but she's been on Secret Avengers. She's been on many iterations of the Avengers. Let's put it that way. When I first started reading the Avengers, that was like I wasn't really a regular reader of the Avengers until maybe after Heroes Were Born. And then with the Busiek run, it really picked up after
fantastic.
that. But I know she had her time as leader of the Avengers.
Yes, she did.
Which we'll get into. And I find that very interesting about her character. But I've definitely enjoyed her time crossing over with Daredevil and with Captain America and Iron Man and all those other characters. So more in other people's books than her own is my experience with Black Widow. I've read a decent amount of those, but not much of her solo stuff, and I actually look forward to eventually going back and reading more of that. But I'll be the pants seat today. I'll be the question asker for the most part about Black Widow.
An invaluable role for an episode like this, my friend.
Yes, indeed.
Murd, go ahead, brother.
My first impressions of Black Widow were pretty similar to Ian's, really. Well, I have to add first that what I always tend to say whenever you ask, what's your first exposure to this Marvel character? And it's always the same thing. It's those Marvel Universe Series 1 and 2 trading cards that Matt slipped me.
Another charge of continuity. Magnificent. Murd.
Yep, there's a certain constants in the timeline. Yep. It's just anchor points. But yeah, Matt trying to draw me into the hobby, and when we were in junior high, and he gave me these trading cards to look at.
Now, was she in the gray costume in those trading cards?
Yes, indeed. And so for that reason, whenever I think of Black Widow, it is this costume that I am showing everyone in the room right now.
Nice.
From
that's the Miller design.
Yes, it is. In fact, this might even be a Miller piece of art.
Looks like it is.
Black Widow, yes, on page 28 of issue 2 of the official Handbook of the Marvel Universe Deluxe Edition, 1985.
Great.
Nice.
Yeah, so that is with the short hair, the gray body stocking, and the little spider crawling up her left breast. It's the first thing that I think of. Even though she's better known for the 70s outfit,
right?
With the black costume, the long red hair, the widow's sting gauntlets on her wrists. Yeah. But yeah, that's what I think of first. And she was also one of many characters present in the Infinity War miniseries back in '92, which got me into reading comics. But the first time I actually encountered her in a comic story is, well, similar to Ian. It was in The Avengers, but it was a couple of years sooner, though, because it was 1993. It was one of the series that I sampled from Marvel after Infinity War drew me in. And it was I had to look it up just now. It was issue number 360 of The Avengers. It was the one with the copper foil embossed.
Oh, I remember that
Vision.
one. Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Okay. To celebrate the Avengers' 30th anniversary, they did like 4 of those, I think, like copper, silver, gold, and platinum. And so that was the first one. And as Ian mentioned a moment ago, she was this was during the Bob Harrison, Steve Epting leather jacket period, and she was the chairman and field leader of the Avengers at that point. And I remember being pretty impressed that this lady, with her short hair and her apparent Russian heritage, that she had overcome international boundaries and the often chilly relations between the United States and the USSR to make her way over to the United States and rise through the ranks and be the leader of the preeminent team of superheroes in the Marvel Universe. So that's my first real impression of Natasha Romanova, was to be impressed by her leadership, the caliber of her combat skills, and the fact that her fellow Avengers trusted her enough to let her be the leader.
So you weren't even familiar yet then with her partnership with Daredevil at that point?
I had no idea. Okay. Later on, I saw some 70s back issues or reproductions of covers of 70s back issues of their two names appearing side by side on 70s covers. But yeah, at that point in early 1993, I did not know.
All right. Shani Poop?
I think mine's more akin to Ian's time frame as the Heroes Reborn Avengers, and certainly the movies more so than almost anything. I don't know that I've ever read any of her solo stuff. I'm not even sure that I knew that she partnered with Daredevil in that way, where they'd be on the cover title together. But definitely any group she was part of. That's where I first read her.
Oh, and she was also in that really crappy, that I love mentioning, animated Avengers show on Fox. She showed up in, like, the armor with every other Avenger.
I remember that one.
Is that what it was called?
Yeah. Where they didn't have the rights to use Captain America or Iron Man or Thor or anything like that, so they just threw every other Avenger into a hat and had them be on that team. Yeah.
And I missed 1985. I just missed the year.
I was 1.
Okay, I was like 13. Yeah, I don't know that ever. I don't know.
I've just pulled up on my screen a gallery of Bronze Age covers, and this I can actually the cover you're looking at right now is from the Kevin Smith run when they're.
That's one of my favorite covers.
I had this as a huge when she and Daredevil are swinging against the moonlight. Mm-hmm. I actually had this reproduced as a huge painting in the window of my store.
I'm pretty sure that's done by J. Scott Campbell.
It is.
Cover.
So
yeah, that's one of my favorite covers. I love that whole tangent, that Daredevil series. I really enjoyed that.
Oh, me too.
Anyway,
now we're talking a lot about Daredevil in this episode,
but I don't know that I ever saw any of those from the 70s.
So to segue for me, all right. So I'm going back to mid 1980s, like a year like 1985, Shane.
Great year.
And we're vacationing in Florida every summer and often every winter. My parents and grandparents had purchased a condominium down in Florida, and there was a used bookstore. This is in the town of Stewart, called Jolie's Books. It's long gone, run by elderly people. And I was I was 11 years old, 12 years old, and they had a very large display of back issues, like shelves of long boxes, not in any order, and the price tags were very low. Now, granted, it was the 80s, so back issues were nowhere near as expensive as they could get later on. Yeah. But they were low, and they had silver and Bronze Age books. Like I found multiple copies of Spider-Man 129 in those boxes, for example. Now, Shane, I have to admit, a couple times a brother and I followed your life of crime and changed sticker prices.
I don't know what you're talking about.
And my parents would take us there repeatedly throughout our trips, because my brother and I both enjoyed reading. And I already loved comics, and this is like just a cornucopia, a bonanza, a smorgasbord of old comics. I'd never seen so many in one place before. And I already knew who the Daredevil character, not very well, but I knew him. and they had tons of Bronze Age Daredevil. What struck me was, on the cover, it said Daredevil and the Black Widow on the masthead. And I didn't know who the Black Widow was. Never heard of the character before. So these back issues were not expensive. So my parents, bless them, would buy me, my brother and I, just piles of them. Maybe they were $1 a piece, $2, 75 cents, something like that. And I bought a bunch of these, and I was fascinated with Hydra when I was in my early comic book years, that whole organization. And there was a series of stories where Daredevil and the Black Widow were fighting Hydra. I think they were written by Tony Isabella, if I remember correctly. And I was on the verge of puberty. And I remember there were slight stirrings of, which I probably couldn't even fully verbalize or understand, that this character was incredibly beautiful. And I was really taken by the way she looked, her hair, her attitude. The costume was very striking. I'd never seen like a, quote, cat suit before like that. I mean, I didn't know who Emma Peel was or anything like that. And I loved the fact that they were like these two amazing acrobats, and the way they'd swing together on these wires in seemingly impossible ways. And the colorful villains there, because this is the period of Daredevil that's really wacky. Like Gerber wrote some of these stories, like Moondragon shows up. Like, if you go back
Ramrod, Dark Messiah, and of course Angar the Screamer.
Oh, Murray, I was counting on that. If you go back to our Daredevil and the Bronze Age spotlight, we go into this in much loving detail. But so I'm reading all these stories, and I was really fascinated by the character, by her look, and just by her general demeanor and her abilities. And then as I got older, and I really fully discovered Frank Miller. And I went back and read all the Frank Miller Daredevils. And then I started to really appreciate the sophistication of the character, her history, and also the fact that she was not a clean and pure superhero. You started to really understand, as you get into the Miller work and on, that the Black Widow was at one point a Soviet agent. I realized that the Black Widow was also a killer, that she was not, someone who's never taken a life as some of the other heroes, that she was a complicated character who definitely had a lot of darkness going on there. And I also began to appreciate, as I got older, the nature of her relationship with Matt Murdock, which was also complicated. They were lovers at one point, then they weren't, but they still maintained this close friendship. And I just became, as I got older and I became a more sophisticated reader, and I started to explore more of the comics, I started to really appreciate how sophisticated and compelling the Black Widow is as a character. And also, as the years passed, you get into the 2000s, they started to tell even more sophisticated stories about her, a lot of retconning about her past, the Winter Soldier, for example, her days in the Red Room, and all things we're going to talk about in this episode. And to the point today where the Black Widow is easily one of my favorite Marvel characters, one of the ones I find most compelling, and one of the ones I think they've done real justice to on the big screen, and I'm really happy that she's going to get her own movie.
Yeah,
I can't wait for that.
Long time coming.
Next year.
That to me, that should have been out years ago.
Oh,
Absolutely.
definitely, yeah. And it shouldn't have to be a prequel the way that it was. That it is now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, the one regret I have, I wanted to see her meet Charlie Cox as Daredevil. Like maybe he defends her for some reason in court.
Yeah.
I think that would have been fantastic. I think they would have probably had real chemistry there.
Yeah.
Still might happen.
It could, but that was something I was always hoping they'd do. But that aside, when I finally got the time to come up with a new spotlight, I thought, you know what? I've done all these Marvel characters, but I haven't done one of my favorites. So it's good to be here to talk about the Black Widow.
In Soviet Russia, Black Widow favorites you.
Now, let's pull the curtain back for a minute, ladies and gentlemen. So Ian has been prepping all these bad Soviet jokes for the past 30 minutes.
So you guys are going to have
You can look
some
forward
fun.
to just a menagerie of bad accents. And is the East German gymnastics judge going to come into this one too, or what?
I don't know how good my East German is.
Okay.
Actually, we'll have to figure that out.
Now, Murd, I want to thank you because you read my introduction as only you can.
It was very well composed, Chris. Very nice piece of text.
Merdonian.
Thanks, pal. But in that introduction, I wanted to capture the tragedy, because the Black Widow is a very tragic character in so many ways, and remind the audience of where she comes from and how really dark and tormented her past is, and how a lot of the character's life is about trying to transcend that. And you guys mentioned the Avengers. I mean, when you read that era of the character's history, it was so important to her to be an effective leader of the Avengers. And when they all vanish in the Heroes Reborn, she was one of the ones left behind. And you may recall, she was traumatized with that because she felt like she'd failed, essentially, as leader of the team.
Yeah, I remember there was a special that came out, I think, during the whole disappearance, where we get to see her trying to keep the Avengers going.
Yes, yep.
And then it
and they kind of do that a bit in the last Avengers film, in a way. They brought that theme into it.
That's true.
When she's talking to, like, Rocket Raccoon, and they're all in the holograms and so forth.
Yep.
So there's a lot to talk about here. And one thing I want to also emphasize before we plunge in is that, kind of like when we did like the Doctor Doom spotlight or Black Panther, she's all over the place in terms of publications. Like, she's appeared in so many different books. She's had a series, let's call them mini-series or lengthier finite series that she's had. She's never had like a lengthy ongoing title. So we're going to checklist sort of a lot of her major appearances, but it's not going to be comprehensive because that would just take too long. But there's plenty to talk about here. So, any other initial comments before we plunge in, brothers?
I do feel
please
obligated here, Chris, to we'll lay down one preliminary
Let's hear it.
disclaimer, just to indemnify ourselves against future nitpicking. Before we really dive into the nitty-gritty with Natalia Romanova, we should probably acknowledge that she was not the first character to be called Black Widow to come out through the Marvel Comics.
Good point.
Well, the first at Marvel, but not the first at Timely.
That
Marvel.
is a good point, Murd. Please remind the audience. Thank you.
Well, happy to do so. Yes, the Golden Age Black Widow. Yeah, just
fantastic.
A quick note here, just to acknowledge that she existed.
Murd, I'm sorry, one moment. I just got a chill because you brought out the legal pad.
Oh my God!
Look at Ian's never seen this.
This is the first time I get to see this
the
in
legal
person.
pad?
Oh my God!
Feast your eyes.
How in the hell do you write this small?
He eats a lot of carrots.
Right. Grown from radioactive seeds.
I was just going to say that. Oh, that's my favorite episode of Gilligan's Island.
LinkedIn here.
Oh my!
And then I eat some sugar beets so that
I am fully impressed, man. I am fully impressed. Job well done.
Thank you, sir. I'm all for saving trees while we geek out here.
Yep. You buy them in bulk from Staples?
No, one lasts him about 10 years.
Yeah, I was about to say it's been so long since I've needed to buy.
Nice.
This pad might predate the Staples chain.
That's possible.
But we do buy them in bulk for Christmas barn purchase, though.
There
from
you go.
Staples.
The first one was made of papers.
Ooh.
All right, so Golden Age Black Widow first appeared in Mystic Comics number 4, August 1940. Her alter ego was Clairvoyant. That is the name that they gave her.
I love the Golden Age.
Wow.
She was created by George Capitan and Harry Saul, and she's described as, quote, a human tool of Satan whose very touch means death.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, sure.
now-
Hero. Yeah.
I was just Satan. Wow.
Just pictured Shane as Dana Carvey
Isn't that special?
grimacing at the camera. Yeah, so she was kind of an anti-hero, needless to say. She was a psychic medium who was possessed by Satan to attempt to murder her employers, who then attempted to, and succeeded in murdering her, and then she went to hell, and Satan said, okay, now I'm going to make you my agent. I'm going to send you back out there. You're going to be my repo agent, basically. She was going to expedite the deaths of certain evil individuals so that Satan could harvest their souls that much faster. And so she went around for all of 5 Golden Age appearances, killing criminals so that their souls end up in Satan's reaping basket.
Was she one of the 12?
She was, yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Wow.
Okay.
She kind of faded away for a while, and then she, as Ian pointed out, she showed up in J. Michael Straczynski and Chris Weston's The 12 maxi series.
Which took 12 years to finish.
It felt that way.
Yeah.
It sure did.
But yeah, so we get to learn a little bit more about her. Like, I'm pretty sure we find out that Clairvoyant wasn't really her birth name.
I'm very glad to hear it. Yeah.
So, but anyway, there you go. Before we talk about the best known Black Widow in the Marvel Comics universe, I thought we had to have a little footnote about.
Well, Murd, again, I want to emphasize, and I've said this many times, and it's always true. If I'm in battle and are on the last belt of machine gun ammunition, I know you're going to get there with those canisters. Because let me tell you, I had completely forgotten that there was a Golden Age Black Widow, and yet you always, it's just clutch hitting every time, Murd. Thank you, sir.
I'm just here to back you up, Chris. You're the real heavy hitter on this lineup.
Well, magnificent. And again, if you look at Ian is in all the yellow legal pad. Machine and I are accustomed to it, but
Yeah.
Look at that. Oh, I can't wait.
The closer you get, the more dimensions you see.
It's true, actually.
Sailboat, gotta have sailboat.
It's like a magic eye. Like I swear. Like I think I see a picture of a
Schooner. You dumb bastard. All right, sorry. All right, I didn't mean to go on a Mallrats tangent there. Okay, so
Easter Bunny.
one thing I want to point out right off the bat, because it can be confusing, is let's talk just a moment before we get into publishing history, is the Black Widow's name.
Yeah.
Because everyone, I think, kind of knows her as her first name is Natasha, and Romanov is often what you hear as her first name. Is that what they called her in the movie?
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, her full name is far more involved, and there's some probably purposeful mystery about actually the origin of her name, her birthright, her lineage. So informally, she's known as Natasha. That's what everyone knows her by, or Nat, as Hawkeye will call her in the film. Her full name is Natalia Alianovna. Murd, would you say this? You're going to do it better than I would.
Natalia Alianovna Romanova.
Did you hear that accent? Fantastic. Now, in a lot of the publishing, you'll see her last name be given as Romanov. Mm-hmm. And that led some people to think that she may be actually part of the Romanov dynasty, which was the dynasty of the last Tsar.
Yeah.
Right.
Who was overthrown in the first Russian Revolution of March 1917, and then he was when the Bolsheviks came in the second Russian Revolution, which is the more famous or infamous one, depending on your perspective. The Tsar and his family were taken prisoner by the Bolsheviks, and Lenin ordered their execution sometime after that. So it sort of adds to her lore, the enigma of the character, that maybe she has that Tsarist blood in her, so to speak. But I don't think that's ever actually been confirmed one way or the other. You know anything about that, Murd?
I don't.
Yeah. So just some of the reading I did, there's like some stories seem to kind of give you that possibility. But we're going to call her Natasha throughout this, because that's how she's most commonly known.
Yeah.
In both the comics and in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
It also takes way less time to say it if you just say it that
true
way.
that.
Yeah.
Now, she first appears in Tale Suspense for Pants, I'll say this, 52!
52!
Yep. 1964, entitled The Crimson Dynamo Strikes Again. Plot Stan Lee. Script Don Rico. So again, this is... Remember, Lee would plot everything, but sometimes he was so busy as both art director and as editor-in-chief, he would bring in scripters who would then do the dialogue and captions, like Larry Lieber's brother did that on Iron Man, for example. Mm-hmm. Pencils and Ink by the great Don Heck, who we praised on the show many a time. Letters by the always stalwart Sam Rosen. And the cover caption is, Introducing the breathtaking beauty of the mysterious Black Widow. Now, does anybody know how the Black Widow first appeared, how she looked in her first appearance?
I was reading it on the train over.
Ian, share with us, please. Was this your first exposure to this appearance?
This was my first
let's hear
exposure to this appearance, and she's basically just wearing clothes. Like she's just wearing standard, normal clothes, like nothing even remotely resembling a costume.
Well,
evening clothes.
yeah, she'd been in a cocktail party in the early 60s.
Yeah.
Almost kind of got a bit of a Jackie Kennedy look to her.
Yeah.
The hat and, and I think she has a fur on. Doesn't she have a fur over her shoulders?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
so
a veil, perhaps?
I think she's a Black Widow.
Right, the classic widow's weeds.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, again, like with so many of Stan Lee's early female characters, they really play to certain stereotypes. And there isn't always a great deal of imagination in there initially. And the Black Widow in her early appearances is the classic femme fatale, the menacing seductress, the spy. You can imagine the accent she probably has in your head because you're thinking Boris and Natasha.
Exactly.
In fact,
June Foray.
In fact, speaking of which, the best character that was introduced in this issue, Boris. That's it. That's just his name.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
So there was a Boris and Natasha.
Yes.
Oh, my God.
Hey, Rocky, why don't we pull the rabbit out of my head? Again? I'm overcome with emotion being in the room with these men. Tremendous.
Yep.
Yeah, so, again, the early Marvel Silver Age we've joked about this before when we did our Iron Man spotlights, for example. There was very much a focus on the Red Menace and, the commies and, Thor, Iron Man, all were involved. The Hulk were involved in dealing with communist saboteurs, infiltrators, spies. Of course, Tony Stark as a weapons manufacturer is very much in the front lines of that. And the Black Widow was sent by the Soviets to infiltrate his factory and steal secrets, seduce him. And, of course, Tony's very smitten by her beauty. And that's the character in her first appearances. That's basically how they use her, essentially.
Yeah. She's in a way she's barely even in the issue. Like when you read the story, there's more Boris in this issue than there is Natasha. Yeah. And frankly, Tony Stark is kind of written a little dim-witted in this issue. Like he falls for her stuff way too easily, and he questions the Crimson Dynamo a little too easily. Like,
well, remember because they had a Tales of Suspense. Iron Man only had part of the book, so they had to get to it very quickly.
Yeah, good point.
But like with so many of Lee's concepts, and the artists working with him, there's the kernel of potential and greatness there. And we're going to see that as we move through the publishing history. Has everybody read the first appearance of the Black Widow?
No, I never did.
I have not either.
Okay. So Ian's right on the money with it. I would agree with his interpretation.
Yeah.
Murray, you want to remind the audience quickly who the Crimson Dynamo is, please?
Oh, yes. He was a scientist named Anton Vanko, and he developed a suit of armor that was supposed to be like the Soviet answer to the Iron Man suit. I don't think Titanium Man had come along yet.
No.
But then he, pretty soon after his first appearance, defected to the United States. And I believe in this issue, we have Natasha working with a second Soviet agent in a second Crimson Dynamo armor. In order to,
because Anton defected and was working with Stark, right?
Yeah. Right. So they came to collect him, and I believe both Vanko and his replacement end up dying.
I think Vanko sacrifices himself.
He does,
for Stark, right?
Yeah, and he also essentially died in the Iron Man 2, which is the reason why Ivan winds.
That's right.
Yeah. So,
but Ivan, the Mickey Rourke character, blamed Tony Stark for
he
that,
did,
right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
He did.
Yeah. Now, is Crimson Dynamo going to be in the Black Widow film?
I have not seen mention of that.
Okay.
No, I don't think so.
I know Red Guardian is. That's
Right.
David Harbour from Stranger Things.
And apparently Taskmaster is supposed to be showing.
Yeah.
Oh, terrific.
Yeah, I thought Taskmaster was in there.
Yep.
Taskmaster.
We'll talk more about that later when we discuss other media.
Now, Taskmaster or Spymaster?
I think
thought it was
I think it's
Taskmaster.
Taskmaster.
Okay, good, because Taskmaster is more interesting.
Yes.
Okay, so just a quick overview, and we'll go into some more details and move along of her publication history, just if listeners want to seek out particular issues that are very important in the progression of the characters. So she first appears in Tales of Suspense 52, as you mentioned. She carries over in issue 53. Tales of Suspense 57 is the first appearance of Hawkeye. That's a key issue in the Marvel Silver Age. I'm sure many listeners are familiar with that or familiar with the cover.
Which we covered in our introducing.
Yes, we did.
That was episode 1723, if you haven't heard it.
Murd. That was boom. He's on the yellow legal pad. You see that, Shane?
It's right here on the second half of this fourth little yellow line.
there it is.
He opened the 8th dimension to get
Yes,
there.
and he went to it right away. He didn't have to struggle to find it. That would have been like being in the maze in The Shining.
Yeah.
It's kind of like how a spider knows all the strands of its own web.
And of course, they established that first appearance, and she's still in like the normal
Evening wear.
cocktail lounge like get up, but she seduces Clint, and he's smitten with her right away.
Yeah.
And the tragedy of that story, because we talked about this as you mentioned, is that Hawkeye wasn't quote a villain.
Yeah.
But he kind of got, I think he was wrongfully accused of a crime, like someone had broken into a jewelry store, right? And they thought it was him, and
Yep.
she capitalized on that and brought him over to her side in her quest to act as an effective espionage agent in Stark Industries. Now, Tales of Suspense 64, she gets her first version of a costume. Ian, you want to talk about that costume?
What an atrocious costume. They decided that she needed a mask, so they went ahead and gave her like the full body outfit with like I believe there was a W on it as well, and the mask. She said she fashioned the mask after Hawkeye's. And the mask, this costume also gave her powers because they felt like she needed spider-like abilities, as if they didn't already have some sort of man who also had spider-like abilities.
I'm calling up the image of it now.
She was able to climb walls using the power of the suction cups of this costume. and she also had a very powerful what they say, I think, a vinyl rope that she could that she could swing from, which just made me think vinyl rope.
Yeah, vinyl.
Yeah, that's a thing. But yeah, just overall, it's not a very appealing costume.
Well, to be fair, Don Heck was one of the great illustrators of women in comics in the Silver Age.
Yeah.
And he's the one who brought the Black Widow to life. I think he designed this costume. I'm not 100% positive. Someone can correct me that in the forums.
It kind of looks like he wanted to draw Black Canary, but then just gave her a
that's
cape
what I was thinking.
and a mask and black hair.
Well, because the costume, Natasha had dark hair in these early stories, sometimes long, sometimes short, and it's much the costume is fishnet.
Right.
So it's when we think of the Black Widow, the costume we're thinking of, we're not there yet. That's going to be designed by John Romita Sr., and we'll get to that shortly.
Yep.
So she's still a villain at this point, so to speak. She's still an active operative for the Soviet Union, but that's going to change. And then she makes intermittent appearances in early Silver Age Avengers, issues 29 through 46, initially as an adversary, but then she's going to cross over and essentially become a more heroic character. And a lot of that is because, based on the stories, of her love for Hawkeye, and that sort of helps bring her over to, the good side, so to speak. Now, a key appearance for her in the Silver Age is Amazing Spider-Man 86. And this is when she gets the costume that everybody's familiar with, the Emma Peel Avengers, meaning the British show, that type of catsuit. I'm sure John Romita Sr. had that on his mind, I would think, when he designed it. And in that story, she wants to prove herself because she's solo, so she picks a fight with Spider-Man. And it's the Black Widow we know today, the long red hair, the black body glove, essentially. That's when it first appears in this issue. And that's a very important issue if you're interested in the Black Widow's history. Now, Avengers 83 is the story of the Liberators. Murd, go ahead, you're chuckling.
The Lady Liberators.
Oh, my.
Yes, which was the first appearance of, it was the apparent first appearance of the Asgardian Valkyrie, which turned out to be the villainous Amora the Enchantress in disguise.
That's right.
But she gathered together a group of Marvel heroines, like female superheroes, and in pretense of the women's lib movement.
Yes.
Just to organize them against the male heroes and
to stand up for their rights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And really, it was all just a ruse as part of some scheme of the Enchantresses. But yeah, the Black Widow was a part of that.
She's not an Avenger yet at that point, though. We'll talk more about her history of the Avengers in a moment. Other key appearances. Her first sort of solo run was in Amazing Adventures, 1970-71, issues 1 through 8. And that's where her faithful manservant, Ivan Petrovich, first appears. We'll talk more about him later. When I first became aware of, as I said, was her co-billing with Daredevil, issues 81 through 124. And this is very important.
81 through 124.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
And she shared the masthead with him from issues 93 to 108. It was Daredevil and the Black Widow.
Wow.
And I think it's one of the first times a Marvel comic highlighted the female character as a lead on the title, or a co-lead, if I remember correctly.
It was never Ant-Man and Wasp?
Nope.
No.
Wow. Huh.
Well, I mean, they never really had their own title.
They were in
Just
Tales to Astonish.
right.
I mean, the Wasp
Fair
was certainly
enough.
on the cover.
Yeah, and she was mentioned
Just
in a
not
lot of
just not on the masthead.
But
yeah.
in these issues, remember in the Bronze Age, you had the Ditko-inspired corner symbol for each character, like the quick image so the reader would know who was in that comic. And not only did Daredevil have his corner symbol, the Black Widow had one as well. So, they were really featuring her prominently. Then she appears in The Champions, that ill-fated West Coast superhero team that had a 17-issue run in the latter Bronze Age. At that point, she has an affair with Hercules, by the way. I'm so glad Shane's here. A great story I read for the first time just this past summer. It's been reprinted many times under the title Web of Intrigue. It's by George Perez and Ralph Macchio. It's Marvel Fanfare issues 10 through 13. Beautiful Perez artwork. I mean, he draws a hell of a Black Widow.
I can imagine.
But it's a great espionage story that really explores, the darkness of the character and her past. two miniseries I highly recommend are Black Widow from 1999 by Devin Grayson and J.G. Jones. Gorgeous artwork. And that explores a lot of her Soviet past and, of course, introduces the second Black Widow who tries to take her place.
Is J.G. Jones still working in comics? I really haven't heard his name in a while.
I can't answer that.
Yeah. Mert, any idea?
No, I can't either. It's been a while.
Yeah.
He did something Wonder Woman years ago.
Yeah.
Haikita or Hai something.
I feel like...
Hikatia.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, that's a fantastic story.
Yeah.
Well, what I'm doing right now, symbolically, I'm going over to the break glass when in need of Eric Nolan Wethington, and I just hit the bell, and if you can help us in the forum, so we'd be much appreciated
But
about
of
the
course.
J.G. Jones question.
Yep.
Black Widow miniseries from 2001, written by Greg Rucka, which speaks for itself. I mean,
Yep.
I can't think of anyone better suited to write a Black Widow story than Greg Rucka.
I read that one back in the day. That was really good.
Yes, it was. It's sort of a follow-up to the Grayson and Jones story. A series I loved in 2012 by the great Ed Brubaker was Winter Soldier,
Yes.
which was the ongoing series, you recall, that Brubaker did, which really highlights their relationship, which, of course, has since been retconned into Marvel history.
Yeah. Sure.
And I also want to mention, there's been numerous Black Widow miniseries. The other one I really want to highlight, and I highly recommend, is Black Widow Volume 6, Issues 1 through 12, 2016-2017, by Mark Waid and Chris Samney, which is tremendous.
Waid and Somni have been knocking it out of the park for
Highest
Marvel.
recommendation.
Yep.
And one other publishing moment that's very important is Uncanny X-Men 268. Many of you know the cover. It's got Captain America,
Yep.
Wolverine, and the Black Widow. And the captions on the cover says, "Together again for the first time." And it's a Chris Claremont, Jim Lee yarn. And it explores more of the Black Widow's history from when she was a child during World War II. It's fantastic. So
Sorry, I'm thinking, together again. Gee, it's good to be together again.
Now,
you know what I love? I love when Shane starts to lose it like this. And,
now you said childhood in World War II.
yes.
So, and aging.
We're going to talk about that.
Got it.
Okay. That's a fair question, my friend.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about her powers and abilities. So, as a kid, she was recruited by the Soviets into what was known as their Red Room program. Now, this has all been retconned. This is not in any of the early Black Widow stories at all.
Right.
About when did they introduce the element of the Red Room to her backstory?
It might have.
Was that Miller or was that pre-Miller?
No, it was not Miller.
Okay.
I think it was later than that.
Yeah.
It might have been the miniseries that I'm talking about, the ones from the late 90s, early 2000s.
That could be.
I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
But there was no mention of the Red Room in like the 70s or 80s. I'm pretty positive about that.
Okay.
So Ian, she was given a biochemical treatment.
She got a facial?
Okay. Now, I want to point out to the audience what an invaluable role Shane is serving with us right now because, obviously what we're talking about outside of our love of this medium is totally absurd. And the fact that Shane is pointing that out is always a refreshing tonic for the spirit.
She was presented with herbal essence.
So I guess it's the Soviet version of the infinity formula.
Yeah.
So she has enhanced immunity, strength, speed, and longevity.
Got it.
Think of it as their version of the super soldier serum.
Okay.
Essentially.
Yeah.
Now, there was the doctor behind this was Dr. Ludmila Kudrin. You familiar with that name, Merd?
Not really.
Okay, so-
I've seen the given name Ludmila before,
Yeah.
but not
So
associated with this character.
she was the architect of this program. Now, they reference this a bit in the second Avengers film in their own way when they talk about
Yeah.
her training and how she can't have children because they basically sterilized her to make her more potent as an agent and as an assassin.
Right.
And that's all taken from the spirit of the stories, essentially. And she's recruited into this program as a kid, and she's indoctrinated, of course, to Soviet propaganda, and she's made into one of their ultimate weapons, essentially, in terms of an assassin and a spy and a saboteur. Now, she can press up to 500 pounds. That's her maximum strength potential. Apparently, she can run at speeds of up to 36 miles per hour.
Wow.
Due to this biochemical treatment. She's can withstand injury more than a normal person can. In terms of agility and reflexes, they often use this phrase when talking about Marvel characters who are more or less human. She's at the peak of human potential. So essentially she can dodge gunfire in some cases. And, as we know from the comics, she's a tremendous acrobat and gymnast. I mean, she can keep up with Daredevil. He swings across New York City. So go ahead, Ian. You're about to say something.
She also slices, dices, and makes julienne fries.
See, here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen. Ian's been waiting so long to get into the studio.
Oh, I know,
that
and I am just cracking it out.
Yeah.
That's what you got to do. Also, the way you describe her sounds so much like a failed pilot for a 1980s TV show.
Yeah,
like
maybe even late 70s.
Yeah, like especially if you were to read the introduction that you had Murd do, that could be the narration for
while the credits are going.
Well,
1970s
actually,
pilot.
Throw in some cheesy sound effects.
Ian,
Yeah.
you've hit on something.
Oh God, yes.
There
I know what you're talking
was
about.
talk
Yes.
of a Black Widow Daredevil television
Yes.
show.
You are correct.
Let me get the.
I remember a comic book Urban Legends revealed about
Yes.
this years ago on CBR.
Was it 1970s?
It may have been. If not, it was early 80s.
I would think it would be the 70s.
Let's see.
Here it is.
Yep. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. It's not Nick Cage in the suit, but it certainly does look like Nick Cage in the Daredevil suit.
So I'm sorry we don't have the video to show. People can find this online, but
Yeah.
there was going to be a Daredevil Black Widow television show.
Yep.
Wow,
Yeah,
I
they
did
were
not know that.
Yeah.
It was only really in the costume testing phase.
Yeah, that's all.
Like,
But
never actually
there's
filmed the
there's
pilot.
black and white photos you can find online.
Yep.
Huh.
It's Angela Bowie, who was then the wife of David Bowie,
Wow.
and she appears in a. She looks great in the costume. Actually,
She does.
It's actually a pretty good
Approximation?
approximation. The
Yeah.
Daredevil one, that's kind of rough.
Still better than the Incredible Hulk Daredevil costume, though.
What do you mean? Thor's in one of those too.
Yeah, that was bad, too.
It says she shot some conceptual photos with herself and actor Ben Carruthers in full costume. The show never went further than that.
Wow. I'm really glad that my stupid joke wound up actually
Yep.
leading to this tangent. Good times.
She says here, I received permission from Stan Lee to have the rights to Daredevil and Black Widow for a year. We weren't able to place the series.
Damn.
So,
What could have been?
Ahead of its time.
Yep.
but I got to say, if you look at these pictures, that they really tried to capture her 1970s costume.
Oh yeah. Well, could you imagine this, like, say, like on NBC or whatever, while Wonder Woman was on?
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God. That totally would have worked.
Yeah. So, excellent.
I can hear the 70s kitsch music in the background with that weird bum, bum, bum.
I don't think I would have remembered that unless you'd mentioned it. Well done,
Well,
sir.
I'm glad that my corny jokes have won again.
Yeah, I found this image, by the way, on sci-fi.com, so
Yep.
you can find it there.
Oh yeah.
So, her stamina or healing, again, is at the peak of human potential. Her wounds heal 5 times faster than the average human. As I mentioned, she's one of the great acrobats, gymnasts, and martial artists of the Marvel Universe. Not someone you want to trifle with in any kind of brawl or fight. Granted, she's not super powered, but between her agility, her stealth, her combat acumen, and she's a brilliant strategist and tactician, she's a formidable opponent, regardless of who she's going up against. And again, the darker side of the character, she's one of the most skilled assassins in the Marvel Universe. I mean, the Black Widow has a lot of blood on her hands. As the movie, they said, like, her ledger was red. And she's a brilliant spy. And I forgot to mention this. The first Black Widow story I ever read, and I'm remembering it now, was in a issue of what the hell is that magazine? It was an 80s magazine.
Was it Bizarre Adventures?
Bizarre Adventures, yes. And it was a story but drawn by the great Paul Galassi, who drews a fantastic, I'm going to look it up right now, Black Widow. And I think it was written by, was it Doug Monk? I'm looking it up right now. I'm remiss. I totally forgot to mention this in my notes, but yeah, here it is. Bizarre Adventures 25.
Okay.
Ralph Macchio was the writer, excuse me. Paul Galassi is the penciler. And the title is I Got the Yo-Yo, You Got the String. And it's beautiful black and white artwork.
Wow.
Definitely with Steranko influence in it.
Oh, I love the image.
This is a great black and white story.
Yeah.
And I remember what struck me about it was, in fact, now that I think about it, this is the first Black Widow story I ever read. Even before the Daredevil stories, I had no idea who she was. But she's killing people in
Great
it.
cover, too. That's the Charlie's Angels inspired Bizarre Adventures
Daughters of the
cover.
Dragon are also in this issue. It's a great magazine. I really recommend it. It's a lot of good stories in it. But she's killing people in it. It's a Cold War story. She's involved in like a double cross, so to speak. And Galassi liked to draw movie characters and use them as models for his characters. So her lover in the story looks like Humphrey Bogart. It's fantastic. And now that I remember, this was my first experience with the character, and it floored me. I was a kid. This came out in like 1981, I think. Mm-hmm. So I was 8 years old, and my mother or father bought this at a convenience store and brought it home for me, and it rocked my world. I'd never seen a super heroine type character like this, using both her martial skills and her mind to get out of the situation she was in, and the way she took life. And I hadn't read many spy stories yet. I was such a young kid. I didn't know much about noir or anything like that, or the classic narrative tone of espionage stories. And I just read this story again this summer when I was doing research. It's outstanding, and it really captures the feel of her world and sort of the duplicity and the moral ambiguity of that world.
I wonder what made them pick that book up for you. Way back when
they would just buy random. They'd come. They always bring home stuff for me that they just found. Remember, there was I had no comic shop to go to in 1981.
Right.
So they were going to convenience stores.
But just like that's kind of an obscure thing to get. Nothing super heroic looking about it, really.
Yeah.
Well,
cool.
My first comics came from a friend of my dad's. His name was Whitey. I don't think that was his actual real name. But he just dropped off a bunch of his old childhood comics to my dad one day. And my dad was like, "Hey, you have comics now." I'm like, "Okay, I do." And one of them was a Daredevil. It was like Daredevil, like issue like 18 or something like that with the owl in it. And that was one of my first exposures to Daredevil. So go figure.
I want to point out that the fact that Levenstein is here. Levenstein lives. We mentioned she's an outstanding combat leader, a tactician strategist. Of course, she led the Avengers for a period of time. And this has all been retconned. She was rendered infertile by the serum she was given in the Red Room program. So she could never have children. And they play that up a bit in her scenes with Bruce Banner in Avengers 2. When they talk about when they're in Clint's house, how she can't have a normal life and so forth.
He starts off that he can't have a normal life, and then she retorts with, well, I can't either, so.
There have been a lot of what-ifs that have completely ignored that, because I remember that there were, like, descendants of Black Widow in, like, future Avengers teams and stuff like that I guess somehow they must have found a way or something.
Yeah.
We have to remember, Ian, that continuity becomes more and more an ephemeral concept.
Good point.
We should also point out another one of her greatest skills is that the Black Widow is a master seductress. And Tony Stark fell for her within a few panels in
it was like 17 seconds. It was amazing.
And then, Clinton Barton was also taken
kind of an easy mark, though.
Yeah.
Yep.
And she's had many lovers, of course, Bucky / the Winter Soldier. Alexei Shostakov, the Red Guardian, who will be appearing in the Black Widow film, played by David Harbour. Clint Barton, of course, Hawkeye. Matt Murdock, Daredevil. That's two of her most famous lovers. And also briefly Hercules, which I never knew that when I read that. And I found that to be a very interesting pairing from the Champions era.
Did her and Captain America ever have a thing?
No.
Okay. All right. Because I feel like they might have been hinting at that.
No, in fact, I thought they captured the dynamic of the relationship so brilliantly in the Winter Soldier movie.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. I just watched that the other day.
It's still my favorite of all the Marvel films. But they show in the film how close their friendship is, and also how much she clearly admires and respects him. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think that's what you see in the comic.
Got it.
Consistently. Anything I want to talk about before I move on?
No,
keep going. All right. So we should talk a little bit about her costume, which is part of not just her famous look, but also it also gives her a lot of advantages in combat. It's a synthetic stretch fabric. Micro suction cups allow wall scaling. So
that would be fun.
Although I hear the sound effect in my head. Like, I really hope that every time she does it, it's something like that.
And I'm thinking of the scene
Selfie.
in Roxanne where Steve Martin falls off a tree.
Yes.
And he tries to tell the old ladies that he was abducted by sex-crazed aliens who want to mate with old women.
I love that movie.
That's a great film. Well, he riffed on Cyrano de Bergerac. How can you go wrong?
Yeah.
All right, now obviously the most famous feature of her garment, her outfit, is her wrist gauntlets. All right, they contain the cartridges, tear gas pellets. There's a radio. Of course, it shoots the widow's line, which she swings on. When you often see her swinging around with Daredevil, for example, and of course, most famous, the widow's bite, which is her primary offensive weapon. A 20-foot range of 30,000 electric volt shock. And you saw that in the Winter Soldier film. She used it when they went on that ship in the beginning.
And the line
Yep.
later. Oh,
So
they did a good job of that.
It was nylon. I think I said it was vinyl earlier. It was nylon. Yeah, there we go.
what do we think of the Black Widow's look? Especially, I mean, there's been different examples of it, but
I think it's sleek and very spy-like.
Yeah.
Very, very akin to espionage and keeping in the shadows, hiding out.
and especially the pop culture images of it back in the 60s. You think of the Avengers and Diana Rigg as Emma Peel.
I think she should just be wearing the costume that she wore in the first place. I mean, clearly, like that amazing mask.
You're not going to let that go.
It's terrible. Oh my god! No, this version, the one that we're most familiar with, the one that's been represented as well in the movies, is
And
easily my favorite.
I like the subtle Black Widow symbol around the belt buckle or waistband, whatever
Yes,
design you look at.
Oh, the red. Yeah.
Just a hint.
but I do like her with short hair. So I'd kind of like to see her. I'd kind of like to see her in her normal outfit, just with short hair.
Well, and it's interesting because in the films they've kind of paid homage to that, but giving her different hairstyles.
Yeah.
Throughout the various appearances.
Yep.
I grew up with the Black Widow with the long red hair, and I just love redheads.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's always struck me. But it's a compelling visual. I love John Romita Sr.'s costume design. I mean, he's one of the great costume designers in the history of Marvel Comics.
Yeah.
He definitely lived up to that reputation here. I think it's a great timeless design.
And I think they do a great job of showing that in Iron Man 2.
Oh, yeah.
When she breaks into the facility to get to Vanko and takes out everybody.
Oh.
That costume, the way it's just so expertly choreographed. It is one of my favorite scenes.
That scene, I remember when I saw that, I was so excited. I was like, oh, they got the Black Widow down. They get it. I mean, when she takes out the mace and doesn't even look at the guy, and just contemptuously sprays him with it, and she doesn't even look at him, she keeps walking. I'm like, yep, there it is.
Well, my second favorite is definitely the gray that Murd was originally
The Miller
introduced.
costume.
Yeah, that's pretty good too.
And she wore that costume for quite a while too.
Yep.
That wasn't just a one-off. So there's I remember, I think it's Daredevil 188, the great cover where Daredevil's in the web and she's kind of climbing on him, so to speak. It's a classic image, that cover. Okay, so let's talk a bit about her history. So who is the Black Widow? And as I mentioned at the beginning of our episode, how the Widow is presented really depends on the era and the cultural sensibilities or insensitivities of that time period. So we talked about how in the Silver Age, in the early Silver Age, she was like the stereotypical femme fatale seductress spy, right down to the evening wear, and you can imagine the accent, which Murd did so wonderfully before. And you got that for a while. Then they, as you said, they kind of morphed her into that first costume, but she was still really playing the role of the Soviet spy. Now, so in the Silver Age, that's really her role. Now, as we get into the latter Silver Age, they start to move her more into the heroic category, working with Hawkeye and the Avengers. We'll talk about that shortly. Now, in the late Silver and the Bronze Age, they start to explore the character in some more detail. So first of all, she renounces her fealty to the Soviets, and she defects. But the Avengers don't fully accept her because of her past. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. And she kind of flits around the Avengers title for a while, then she leaves there, and then she becomes, in the latter Silver Age, like a member of the Jet Set. And she has wealth. I don't remember where that comes from, if she inherited it or...
Maybe she earned it performing as a ballerina?
That could be. Or it could also be tied... Again, there's a lot of mystery. It could also be tied into her possible connections to the Romanov dynasty. Maybe someone could correct us on that. But at least in the late 60s, she had money, and she was a jet setter, and to alleviate that boredom, she starts to pursue the role of a solo hero. That's why that issue of Amazing Spider-Man, issue 86, she's trying to prove herself by trying to pick a fight with Spidey. And she's also trying to assert her independence by embarking on a solo career as a hero. And that's one of the themes you see with her repeatedly in the 70s. She's trying to show that she's her own person, that she just wants to break away from expectations that men have for her or society and so forth. And, of course, the Bronze Age is defined by her team-ups with Daredevil. She shares the magazine with him for quite a few issues. They become lovers. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But there's always that tension in the stories. And again, as Murd mentioned with that ham-handed Liberator story, there's a growing sense of the women's movement, of the feminist movement. And you often see where Natasha is struggling with the fact that she loves Matt, but she doesn't want to be in Matt's shadow. And she wants to prove herself in her own right. And then in the modern age, this is when the character becomes, I think, is the most complex rendering. They really explore that she's a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, that she has a background as an espionage agent, both for the Soviets and for S.H.I.E.L.D., that she's a more morally ambiguous character, that she takes life, that she has elements of her past that she's not proud of, that she's trying to sort of escape and gain redemption as in a role as a hero. But they kind of more and more as we get into the 2000s, they acknowledge that she's an Avenger, but she also still dwells in that world of intrigue simultaneously.
Yeah.
So there's that complexity, that darkness that I really enjoy about the character.
She was also on, I think, multiple iterations of the Secret Avengers. And I remember there was one, I think, what was it, like a 6-issue arc that Warren Ellis did. Each one was a solo story for a specific character on the team. And Black Widow had one where she wound up going, I think, 5 years back in the past in order to save Captain America and War Machine from dying on a mission. And it's a really well done issue that really just it added to her espionage part for me, her S.H.I.E.L.D. part, and her Avengers part all at the same time with the mastery of Warren Ellis. You can't beat that.
No, you cannot.
Yeah,
I don't think I've read that story.
It's good stuff. Yeah,
I'll have to read that.
Yeah, I think it's collected. I think they collected his specific stories just because again they're like 5 or 6 solo issues that he was doing for different members of the team.
Oh, wait a minute! I did read those. They're fantastic.
Yep.
Because I loved the Matt was it Matt Fraction or Ed Brubaker?
Brubaker.
I love the Brubaker stuff with where they had Shang-Chi, those stories. And then you're right, Ellis took over. Those are fantastic
They're
stories.
really good.
Ian Wilk. Oh.
Thank you.
Deep cut, my friend. Deep cut. Now, I want to talk a bit about, we mentioned her first appearances, and in Tales of Suspense 64, interesting moment. So Lee likes to be topical, so he brings Nikita Khrushchev into the story. And Khrushchev, of course, was the premier of the Soviet Union at that time. This is at the height of the Cold War. And because she has failed in her missions, Khrushchev says, if you don't destroy Iron Man, we're going to kill your parents. Now, this is a confusion because they retcon later that her parents died in Stalingrad, and that in the chaos of that battle, Stalingrad is one of the epic battles of the Second World War. Her mother is being consumed in a building on fire, and she throws baby Natasha out the window to Ivan Petrovich, who happens to be down there. He was a soldier, and he catches her, and he's going to become like her protector and raise her, essentially. But in this early Silver Age story, apparently she has parents.
Continuity.
But it's back in early Silver Age. If she doesn't, and their lives are threatened, if she doesn't destroy Iron Man. Now, of course, she does not destroy Iron Man, and eventually she's going to defect. Now we get to the Avengers. Avengers 29. She's brainwashed by the Soviets because they're questioning her loyalty to destroy the Avengers, and she recruits Sandman and Power Man. Which Power Man are we talking about here, Murd?
We're talking about Eric Jostin, the original Power Man, who was gifted, I think, by the machinery of Baron Heinrich Zemo, in tandem with the Enchantress, to give him, the enhanced strength and all that good stuff.
And it'll later be Atlas and the Thunderbolts.
Yes, he would. After a stint as the villainous Goliath.
Yes.
Yeah, he is. I think his powers are ionic in nature.
And I remember there's a Luke Cage issue in the Bronze Age where they fight because the original Power Man wants to reclaim the mantle from Luke Cage.
Mm-hmm. And of course he gets
whooped.
His rear end handed to him by the hero for hire.
Excellent, Murd. Now, in Avengers 30, again, these early stories, a lot of it's based on her relationship with Hawkeye, and she breaks free from the brainwashing to save Hawkeye. And she then she doesn't fully really become an Avenger, but she's spending time with the team. Great moment, issue 36. Clint proposes that Natasha be given membership in the Avengers, and Hank Pym, of all people, retorts, "The Avengers aren't a rest home for retired villains."
Hank.
Before or after abusing your wife, Hank?
Oh, boy.
Hank.
When meanwhile, half of the Avengers are former villains.
Yes.
That's one of my favorite things about the Avengers. Is
Cookie
that
Quartet.
It's essentially the place for former villains to redeem themselves. Like, that's what they're for, man. Come on.
Now, Avengers 38 is Natasha's first, the beginnings of a relationship with S.H.I.E.L.D. She's recruited by S.H.I.E.L.D. to act as a double agent behind the Iron Curtain. And issue 43 is the first appearance of the Red Guardian, Alexei Shostakov. Murd, anything you want to say about the Red Guardian?
Well, yeah, he was kind of a Hal Jordan figure. He was
The test pilot, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Combat pilot in World War II and hotshot test pilot post-war. And he was recruited by the KGB to become
They're Captain America,
right,
basically,
exactly.
yeah.
And so they fake his death in a plane crash in one of his tests, and that's what makes Natasha the Black Widow.
Well, because they were married.
Right.
They were in love with each other, and they wanted to use him for their own purposes, and that they felt that required them to be separated, and then they faked his death, as you said. And
which
that's
then provided a little bit of impetus for Natasha to embark on training of her own.
we have to remember that if you look at the origin of Natasha now, as it's more fleshed out in terms of continuity, she was again saved at Stalingrad by Ivan Petrovich, and then because she was like a prodigy basically in terms of her intellectual abilities, her athletic abilities, and the Soviet government recognized that, and they recruit. She had a choice, but they indoctrinated her into their intelligence community, and they started to train her, and they were training Alexei as well, and they became close and married, and then as you said, they broke them up, and then then they could plunge her into her Black Widow persona and that training. So I'll be interested to see how they use this in the film, because I know they're going to have the Red Guardian character. So interested to see how they apply that story. So, but the Red Guardian then shows up, and we realize that he did not die. And the next issue he does sacrifice himself to save Natasha. Actually, I don't think he dies forever though. But
He got better.
yeah, that's in issue 44 of the Avengers. Now,
Kind of died.
I'm jumping ahead to Avengers issue 76. She decides to move on. She dumps Clint. "I never loved you. Never." She weeps a single tear. We have to remember the great melodrama of Marvel romance.
As the Avengers turn.
Oh, my God. You know, what's exciting is that I wasn't sure what to expect by bringing Ian to the studio. Because he was clearly really jonesing for it, and he's unleashed now. And it's almost like this bad Borscht Belt thing you got going on here, buddy.
You've made a huge mistake.
Fantastic. We mentioned earlier Amazing Spider-Man 86. So Romita Sr. did the classic costume design that everybody's familiar with. And again, the costume you see in the movie is a take on that, basically.
Yeah.
She has to prove herself. Now, just like Quicksilver in Spider-Man 77, everyone says, well, if I want to prove myself, I got to beat up Spider-Man. So...
Is that like a test that you have to pass in the Marvel Universe? Is like
Beat up the teenage kid?
yeah, right.
Well, to be clear, Petey was a college student at this point.
Sorry.
But she picks a fight with Spider. Now, Spider-Man is actually ill, as he often is in his stories. He wasn't, but he still ultimately prevails. But she gives a good accounting of herself, and it gives her further more of a drive to focus on her own destiny and forge an identity for herself. Because remember, she's been a Soviet puppet for so long.
Right.
She was kind of in the shadow of the Avengers and Clint, and now she's trying to get out and prove herself. And that leads us right into Avengers 83, as Murd mentioned, which was and again, I'm a reverent lover of Roy Thomas's scripting, but it is, a very ham-handed attempt at being topical. Beautiful John Buscema art. It's a classic Avengers Silver Age story, and most importantly, There's a Rutland, Vermont Halloween parade in this story. So, you familiar with that?
We've discussed it on the show.
That we haven't on your show or this show?
This show.
Oh, we sure have many times.
It was a Muddle the Murd question a little
Yes.
while ago, and I could not remember the name of the town.
That's right. So, just in case some listeners aren't familiar with, there was a period of time in the early 70s where creators from both DC and Marvel would make pilgrimages up to the town of Rutland, Vermont, where for years and years now they've had an annual Halloween parade that features superheroes. And if you read stories from around this is early 70s, both DC and Marvel, the creators will put themselves in the story when they go to visit Rutland, and they would kind of incorporate the parade into the storyline. So the Avengers, I think the Justice League had a story at Rutland, if I remember correctly. They're a lot of fun. Like Roy Thomas which appears in it, Jerry Conway, other creators. So it's a fun little sort of microcosmic world in comics in that era. Which I highly recommend you check out. It's a good time. I mentioned Amazing Adventures 1 through 8, 1970-71. So you got Buscema art in the first few issues. Now, John Buscema is one of the great artists of the Silver Age and Bronze Age. Well, hell, even into the 80s, really. And he drew a sensational Black Widow. Then Gene Colan took over, no slouch himself when it comes to rendering a character like that. You got scripts by Gary Friedrich, Mimi Gold, and Roy Thomas. And as I said, Widow was bored of her jet-setting life, and she decides to, again, further make her mark as a solo hero. Issue 1 is the first appearance of Ivan Petrovich, her long-standing protector, and as Murd said, her butler, her chauffeur, all-around father figure, really.
And later on, we learn that he raised her.
Yes, that again they retcon that in the carnage and rubble of Stalingrad, he saved her and raised her, but of course he had to stand by when the Soviets took her into the program. But he's always been a part of her life. I don't know if he's still around now, though.
I was going to ask, was there ever a meeting of the Butlers, like between the Avengers and Black Widow? Like,
so Ian, here's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
When I take you back to the train station,
yeah,
we're going to go to probably through New Brunswick. There's a comedy club called the Stress Factory.
that wasn't even a joke. I was literally asking the question.
But the way you were delivering it, though, it had that feel to it.
Yeah,
What I was
yeah,
gonna say,
I know.
you go to open mic night. See how we do. Now,
You know when Marvel did Jarvis ever meet Ivan?
Did you ever notice?
Do you ever wonder? What do you think?
I mean, Jarvis. I'm sure that they probably did meet at least once, Jarvis and Ivan, if he was around after.
most likely.
Yeah.
But we'll. If somebody can help us on the forums, I don't recall seeing Ivan in the more recent Black Widow stories. I'm not even sure if he's alive.
Got it.
So, now, typical early 70s, they tried to be topical. So one of the issues of Amazing Adventure, she helps Puerto Rican activists. One of the titles of one of the issues is The Widow and the Militants. And, you have dialogue such as, up against the wall, establishment.
Oh, my.
I love early 70s Marvel.
Yes. So this is safely a part of the relevance movement.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Love that. And then we move to what, as I mentioned before, was one of sort of her set piece for the Bronze Age, which is her pairing with Daredevil. She appears in issue 81, and Death is a Woman Called Widow, which is scripted by Jerry Conway, and she aids DD against the Owl, Ian.
There you go. He's back.
And that's that 1 month. It's a great cover. It's the Black Widow swimming in like a under a muddy river, and Daredevil's under the water. She's coming to save him. That's the 1 month where every Marvel comic was 25 cents with extra pages and a glue-bound cover.
Nice.
Which was a sales technique done by Martin Goodman, who was then the publisher, where he raised the price. Then DC raised the price. Then he dropped the price down the next month a nickel, whereas DC stayed at the higher price. So he dropped it another 20 cents. Because we all know, if we love Marvel Bronze Age, they're 20-cent covers in the early 1970s.
Still 20 cents.
So
Yeah.
now, here's a quote from Jerry Conway from back issue 45. Again, you need to do research for anything involving American comic book medium, go to Tomorrow's. It was my idea to team up Daredevil and the Black Widow, mainly because I was a fan of Natasha and thought she and Daredevil would have interesting chemistry. I'm not sure what I based this on other than my desire to bring the characters together. I'm a sucker for redheads. So Conroy is one of the go-to writers for Marvel. We've talked about Jerry Conway many times. One of my favorite writers. He was a go-to writer for the company in the Bronze Age. He wrote pretty much everything. I mean, the man's output was prodigious in this time period. He's most known, of course, for his legendary run on Amazing Spider-Man, which I cherish from the Bronze Age. But he was also writing Daredevil, and he was the architect of this team-up. Now, I did some background research. Apparently, in 1971, Daredevil sales were slumping. And the book might have even been bi-monthly, now that I think about it. That's possible. And there was even talk apparently of combining the book with Iron Man's.
Yeah.
Wow. And Conway suggested, why don't we try the Black Widow? And lo, a legend is born. So, have we all read any of those Bronze Age stories?
No,
I haven't.
I'm completely remiss. I didn't even know that, like I said earlier, I didn't even know that they teamed them up like that. Wow.
They're a lot of fun. Again, go back to our Daredevil in the Bronze Age spotlight. But it's a really interesting period in Daredevil's history.
It's all on Unlimited. So
I was just going to ask that if it was on Unlimited.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
And don't think of like the gritty street Daredevil. This is, like Murd mentioned, this is Daredevil fighting one wacky villain after another. And in fact,
It was during this period he moved to San Francisco,
yes,
right?
he moved to San Francisco. And what happened was, when they introduced her into the Daredevil universe, she's facing a trumped-up murder charge. And this is the period when he's the district attorney. He's being blackmailed by the villain, Mr. Klein. Remember who he was, Murd?
He was an android.
That's correct. And fantastic. And because he's being blackmailed, he's vigorously prosecuting Natasha, basically harassing her with his powers as a district attorney. And Matt decides to turn against Foggy and come to her defense. And they forge a bond, and they start a relationship, and they move to San Francisco with Ivan in tow. Natasha has a mansion out there.
Of course she does.
Right on the water. And here's what I love. I'd forgotten about this because of the attitudes of the time. When it comes to portraying superhero romance, they live on separate floors in the mansion. It's like the version of the Brady, the Brady Bunch were in the same
Lucy
bed.
and Ricky beds.
Yeah, I'm thinking of that. Yeah. So they lived on separate floors.
Lucy and Ricky slept in separate beds, and yet she somehow still got pregnant.
Osmosis.
Fun
Yeah.
TV fact. You know the first couple that actually shared a bed in a TV
I
show?
thought it was the Brady
Was that
Bunch.
the Brady Bunch?
No, it was Herman and Lily Munster.
Wow.
Right, I can picture that.
Oh,
Yes.
wow.
It's because they were basically monsters. They could get away with flaunting
That's funny.
norms of sensorial propriety.
Go figure.
Sensorial propriety.
Yeah, not my best turn of phrase, but it gets the point
It
across.
is magnificent, Murd.
Dick Van Dyke too. Him and his wife were in separate beds too back
Yep.
then.
Oh, Mary Tyler Moore.
Married,
Yeah.
Yep. Well, in between on commercial breaks, they moved them together, and then.
Well, I guess in this case,
Yeah.
Matt or Natasha would, pad up to each other's room off panel.
Yeah, exactly.
They'd meet in the middle floor between their two floors. There's like 17 floors in her, man.
Yeah,
Now-
come on.
Throughout their adventures, Natasha often talks about her widow's curse, that she feels she can't maintain a loving, long-lasting relationship. And again, this is a recurring theme, really with the character since the late Silver Age. She doesn't want to be defined by her relationship with a man, in this case, Matt Murdock. So she's torn between her love for Matt and her determination to prove her independence. Now, here's some great quotes that kind of capture this plot device. This is from issue 120, Tony Isabella scripting. This is she's Natasha speaking. The liberated lady you fell in love with became your sidekick. I used to be so darn strong, Matt, and I feel it's slipping away from me. Then Matt responds, and this is a little bit later on, they're getting ready to go out to a dinner party. He says to her, so why don't you slip into something barely legal? I want my date to be the most gorgeous thing at the party. Then he spanks Natasha's butt.
Oh boy.
Natasha says, you male chauvinist, ow! And then Matt says, I said move it, darling.
Wow.
So, fascinating. Obviously, that would not pass muster.
Rachel doesn't put up with that from Ross, that's for sure.
Oh my god. Wow. So Matt needs to go to counseling. Oh boy.
I remember the comic Village, they show him spanking her butt on panel.
Watch out or Papa spank.
Yeah. So, again, a fascinating window into a very different perspective on, the battle of the sexes and gender relations.
Yeah, wow.
Why don't you go in the kitchen and bake me a pie?
look at some advertisements from that time too. I came across some. Whew,
Yep.
weird.
Again, so why don't you slip into something barely legal?
Wow.
Jeez.
So
Okay then.
a few issues later, not surprisingly, they split in issue 124. And
Hopefully, she kicked them out of her mansion.
I hope so.
she says, part of me does want to stay, Matt, but I just can't play second fiddle in a one-man band anymore. Again, they feel that she needs to get out on her own and establish and assert her own identity. Again, these are really fun stories. Some of them are bizarre, some like just what I just explained to you. Again, it's in the context of when it was written, but that doesn't transfer well in 2019, obviously, but it's fascinating. But again, the villains they face are really fun. You've got some Steve Gerber scripts in there. You've got, Moondragon as a whole thing with her in these stories. Murd mentioned Angar the Screamer. I mean, it's a trip.
There's another one I'd like to throw out here.
Please.
Because it does specifically involve Natasha. The Mandrill.
Oh! Go ahead, Murd, explain the pheromones.
Right. The Mandrill and his often partner in crime, Necra Sinclair. Yes, they're...
Yep.
One of them, Necra is kind of a pseudo-vampire-looking lady with chalk white skin and fangs who's the madder Necra gets, the stronger Necra gets. And the Mandrill, meanwhile, looks like a large ape
Yes.
with the blue cheeks and the red nose.
Yeah.
Remember Bill Ellis, when we were at CGS by the Sea in Stone Harbor, had a shirt with a Mandrill print on it?
Yes, that's right.
Yes, and as Chris alluded to a moment ago, the Mandrill's special power, other than the usual physical enhancements you would expect of a human ape, the speed and the swinging ability, the upper body strength, he had super pheromonal abilities.
Yes.
He emitted pheromones that could dominate the will of any human female that inhaled them. And so he ended up... he developed this criminal organization called Black Spectre, which was composed entirely of women.
Which is still around. They still have some stories with Black Spectre.
It's not the Mandrill in charge these days.
No,
I
it's
don't
not.
think, and I don't think it's exclusively pheromonally mind-controlled women either. But the Black Widow did fall under his spell for a little while there. Became a member of his.
I can
his
see the
group,
covers from those
his
stories.
harem.
Yep.
Oh, and let's also mention the Silver Samurai first appeared in the middle of this run. Issue number 111.
Nice.
Right from the illegal pad, ladies and gentlemen. After she leaves Matt, this is when she joins the Champions, which is a 17-issue one. I want to say that was Tony Isabella, too. I think who wrote those stories.
You are correct,
Yeah.
at least at the beginning. And I think we got some John Byrne art
We
in
did
before
at the end. And
Oh,
Murray, you
wow.
want to remind us of the interesting roster of that team?
Oh, yeah, just all an interesting little handful of characters that had nothing else going on at the time that Marvel decided to throw together on the West Coast for some reason. So Hercules.
Hercules.
As Chris has said, this is I didn't know that either.
Yeah,
that,
they had a
that
relationship.
Hercules and Black Widow hooked up in that series. Ghost Rider, the original Johnny Blaze, of course.
Not really a team player, but...
But they made him one.
Yeah.
Because, and also from the recently disbanded original X-Men, Angel and Iceman.
Yep. Yeah, it's one of the more bizarre teams in Marvel history.
Yeah. Eventually, they were joined by Natasha's fellow Soviet Darkstar.
Kind of the original Avengers West Coast, really. Like when you think about it, because Avengers West Coast never had the best roster. Like it was always the B team.
Who's left? Yeah.
Yeah.
Plus Iron Man.
Yes.
But it was led by Hawkeye.
He could
that is true.
afford to fly back and forth.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Iron Man.
I'm really glad Shane, I really missed you, man. I haven't seen you in a while.
I'm glad we're all here.
It's been a while.
Yes.
Everybody is contributing beautifully here tonight.
Now, after the Champions run, I mentioned this earlier, and this, if you want to really get a great Black Widow story, if you want to kind of dive into the solo stuff, this is a classic. Marvel Fanfare issues 10 through 13. Was everybody a reader of Marvel Fanfare in the day?
No.
I had one issue which was given to me by a well-meaning relative who didn't know
well-meaning relative.
anything about comics at all. Apparently just walked into a comic shop and said, I'd give me comics. And the guy just kind of dipped into a random back issue bin he had near him and sold my relative a few issues for a few dollars each.
Yeah, it's a fun series because they would highlight different characters in 1, 2, maybe 3-ish part stories. like an anthology series, essentially.
And the focus was on creators, right?
Yes. And so Ralph Macchio, working with George Perez, another artist, did a 4-issue Black Widow story. First of all, the Perez rendering of Black Widow, as I said, is phenomenal. And it really explores her espionage background, the darker aspects of her past. She's recruited into a very sort of duplicitous and ambiguous mission. If it's usually under the heading Web of Intrigue in terms of different trades. In fact, the trade I have it's a hardcover. Remember when Marvel did the deluxe editions with the color bound spine? They'd have different classic stories in hardcover format. Sure. They did one for Web of Intrigue, and the backup story in it is that Macchio Gulacy Black and White Bizarre Adventure story I was raving about before. That's also in that collection.
Oh.
So you get 2 classic Black Widow stories. I highly recommend that. It's a great one. Again, as you mentioned, you can also go to Marvel Digital, and all these stories are there.
Yes, indeed.
Then, of course, we have for one of the more defining aspects of our history, which is the Miller era. And Miller does not forget the place she has in Matt's life. I'm sure many of us are familiar with the classic Miller Bullseye stories, and the issue where Bullseye has Black Widow captured on the front cover, and he's strangling her with like the wire from a hairdryer. And Miller continues to emphasize they're not lovers anymore, but they still have this close friendship, Matt and Natasha. And she appears periodically throughout that era, and when Matt is battling the Hand, or in the whole Elektra Resurrection story, the Black Widow is there to help her. In fact, she's poisoned by the Hand and nearly dies. And she gets a new great costume that we were talking about that Ian first introduced to her in issue 188, which is a classic cover.
I feel like I prefer characters like Black Widow when they're just friends with
Why is
fellow
that?
superheroes. It's a little bit less demeaning. Like when they're used as love interests, a lot of the times I feel like they become second fiddle to the.
That was her complaint in the Bronze Age.
Exactly, especially after now mentioning the chauvinist nature of it. Like I think I 100% prefer characters like her as just friends with their male counterparts.
We have to remember also that as the sensibilities of the time change, the writing changes.
Sure.
Miller is writing from a different time, a different perspective.
Right.
And he starts to develop and remind us of the bond between these two characters that has always been there, essentially.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, you mentioned how Natasha becomes a key member of the Avengers in the 1990s. Mm-hmm. Now, she was briefly a member, this is kind of often overlooked, in the Bronze Age. She was offered official membership in Avengers 111.
Which is a crossover with Daredevil number 99.
Yes.
Yeah, she accepted, Daredevil refused.
So because of her loyalty to Daredevil, she remained by his side. But that's when she was first granted membership. Now, in the Silver Age, when she was there with Hawkeye, as you could recall from the Hank Pym comment, she wasn't fully accepted by the Avengers because of her villainous background.
Was Daredevil really never an Avenger until Bendis' run?
Yep.
Wow.
Huh. Yeah, he'd worked with him a few times, but never been a member.
Think of the great Byrne stories in the late 70s, where there's the one with the Grey Gargoyle, where Daredevil is frozen by the Grey Gargoyle. He's on the cover of one of those Avengers stories. That's when Byrne did the whole Yesterday Quest stuff with Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver.
Right.
That's
Nice.
a great run. I want to say, was it Roger Stern writing? I think those stories.
Could easily have been.
Yeah, it's good stuff. So, and as you mentioned, Natasha becomes a major Avenger during the 90s. Now, I know people have mixed views on that period of Avengers stories. Some people look disdainfully on the leather jacket era.
Oh, God.
As was mentioned. That was when Bob Harris was scripting. Steve Epting, no slouch when it comes to art.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, one of my favorites.
Actually, kind of like the leather jackets.
To each their own. I'm fine with them. Some people are not fans of them, though.
I didn't mind that they were leather jackets. I minded when they would go on top of other costumes.
Which they often did.
Exactly.
That just made it kitschy or a little bit more fun.
Natasha often would wear the jacket over her costume.
Yeah.
Takes away from the spice side of it.
So, as we mentioned earlier, when the Heroes Reborn, I don't know if you want to call that a catastrophe or a triumph, depending on your perspective on it, but
Somewhere between the two.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, when they're ushered off into that pocket universe so the image creators could have their way with the Marvel characters for a year,
Yeah.
Natasha did not go into the pocket universe.
Yep.
And they do a great job of exploring how traumatized she is because she feels like as the chairperson,
Right.
she has failed the team.
Yeah.
More than a twinge of survivor's guilt
Yeah,
happening
exactly.
there.
Yeah.
I remember she popped up in Kurt Busiek and Mark Bagley's
In Thunderbolts. Yes, she
right?
did.
She called herself the Avenging Avenger.
She was reconnecting with Hawkeye because he was leading the Thunderbolts.
Right. She was jumping around hunting some of the Avengers' old foes as a way of helping her to cope with
Yes.
having lost
No,
the
they,
team.
it was the way they handled her character. I thought was very well done in those stories because for her, the Avengers is always the means of redemption.
Yeah.
To try to make up for, as they say in the movie, all that red in her ledger. Essentially.
I think this is when she returned to an approximation of her original of her 70s costume.
Yes, she had the gray costume throughout. I think much of the 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah, she got a different costume in The Crossing, when they tried to turn the Avengers into Youngblood. and then that went away.
I got to be honest. I thought that story was so dreadful. I don't even really remember it now.
Oh, what? Young Tony Stark wasn't doing it for you?
Teen Tony!
Oh, that's right.
I blocked that out of my memory.
I haven't thought about that in a long time since you brought it up.
Neither has Marvel.
Yeah, my favorite part. He went into Heroes Reborn as young Tony and came out fully grown on the other side.
Busiek actually did try to come up with an explanation for that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was in. I think
Bless
it
his
was
heart.
a backup story in one of the Avengers annuals where Jarvis was answering Avengers fan mail and answering questions. So that was one of the things he had to address, like why Teen Tony was an adult and why the Wasp wasn't an insect lady anymore.
I got to read that story. I want to see how Busiek addressed that. But you're right. So after the Heroes Reborn, she returns to a version of her classic costume.
Yeah.
And that's more or less what she's been wearing ever since in some form or another. We mentioned the Black Widow miniseries that I highly recommend. The one from 1999 is the first appearance of Yelena Belova, who is another Red Room graduate who wants to take on the mantle of the Black Widow. And she actually gets into a battle with Natasha to try to claim the mantle. And the J.G. Owen Jones art, I remember, is breathtaking in this story.
I think she's showing up in the Black Widow movie too, if I remember correctly.
Is she the Yelena Belova character?
Yeah, I'll have to look up who's playing her, but I think I remember hearing that in the casting news.
Now, as I mentioned, in the 2000s, they really emphasize her role as an espionage agent, the more moral ambiguity of the character, the darkness of her past. They do all the retconning with the Red Room and her history, how she, how Ivan saved her, and so none of that was really explored in the Silver and Bronze. I should also mention, I almost forgot, the X-Men issue 268, which we mentioned earlier in the episode. One of my favorite X-Men stories, single issue stories of all time. It's a Chris Claremont Jim Lee. First of all, I'm a sucker because it's a World War II story. And it's Captain America early in his career. If you open the splash page, it's him attacking hand assassins. And he's thinking, like, what the hell have I got myself into? It's like early Cap trying to figure out sort of how he's going to handle all of this. It's got Baron von Strucker in it. It's got Ivan. It's got Logan and Madripoor, which is like the Casablanca of the Marvel Universe, essentially. And Natasha is a young girl. And I'm assuming this is, in this storyline, Ivan is already raising her. And because of her abilities, Hydra wants to get their hands on her. And Cap, Logan, who's not Wolverine per se yet, and Ivan team up to save her and save her from Hydra and the Hand. It's a great... I mean, there's a great moment in the story where it's when Steve Rogers and Logan meet for the first time, essentially.
Oh, wow.
And they sit down at the table, and Wolverine's sniffing the air, and he goes... I don't get a whiff of alcohol on you, not even a whiff. And Steve says something about that, about how he does, he wants to keep himself in shape and this and that. And then Steve says to Wolverine, "That's something an animal would do." And Logan says something like, on the lines of, "Well, yeah, I'm more favorable to animals than I am to people," basically. So, if you haven't read this story, X-Men 268, it's Claremont at his best.
I feel like they did in fact, I'm pretty sure they did do a version of this story minus Black Widow in the X-Men animated series of the 90s. Because I remember they had an episode with Captain America. And I do not remember Black Widow being around. So it may have been their loose adaptation of something like this.
Well, it's a classic, so I wouldn't be surprised if they went to the well on that one.
Yep.
One of the things that interesting in the 2000s, I mentioned the Grayson, Devin Grayson miniseries, the Greg Rucka miniseries, which is a follow-up, which are both wonderful. She takes Tony's side in the Civil War. And again, you're given the impression because she wants to show that she's trying to atone and gain redemption, that she decides to take the government line in the Civil War, although she's reluctant. And when you go back to the Civil War movie, right, that they kind of try to capture that, where she's kind of really struggling with the decisions she's making, and she helps Steve get away in the film initially, and so forth. So, for me, Civil War is one of the great Marvel crossover stories. A lot of the crossovers I don't even care anymore. That one I still think is impactful. What do you guys think of Civil War years after it's going to come out?
I'll let you know when I read it.
I don't want to spoil too much then, Murd.
I think everything stands up except for Civil War Frontline, where the line is spoken to Captain America that he's so out of touch he doesn't even know what a MySpace is.
Well, it was being topical. It's Marvel tradition.
Yes, I understand. And they even rewrote that line later on, like when they referenced it in a future storyline, and rewrote it for her to say something like Twitter instead of MySpace. It's like that's how much retro.
That's the Marvel time sliding.
Yes,
come on,
exactly. But the story itself stands up for the most part. I think it's easily my favorite Mark Miller story. Well, second favorite Mark Miller story, because Old Man Logan, I think, is
tremendous.
Is a bit better for that.
And I think it had more ramifications than most crossovers do.
Yes,
it did feel like it had a lasting impact.
Yeah.
I've become so burnt out on crossovers. I know. I had to leave the previous episode. But did you guys talk about the new crossover that they were promoting in the latest previews?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
Which one? The 2099 or the?
No, the main characters.
The one that you said reminded you of Prelude to Infinite Crisis.
The one shot thing, the incoming.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, we did discuss that. Oh, also the other thing about Civil War that has to be brought up at least once is it put the word Clore on the map. Clone Thor. Clore.
Oh, that's right. Well,
I still also go in when I go into bookstores or comic stores. I open it up and look at our logo on the microphone.
Oh yeah,
that's right.
Yes.
And I look for Brian Deemer's name and the gold.
Wait, in Civil War?
Yeah.
Right when Peter
That far
reveals
back.
himself.
Wasn't there a comic that also had him reading the comic forums? I know that the comic forum showed up in the background of a
somewhere.
Yeah, it might have been a comic that Hollowell did the colors for.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, but
Well,
good times.
her role in the Civil War, I think, is a very important moment in the character's history, because you see sort of how torn she is between the need to atone, as she sees it, for what she's done in her life, especially as an espionage agent, but also that she's torn between, because she has to decide between friends, comrades in arms, people who have accepted her all these years.
Yeah,
Civil War is a story from that still I haven't read in a while, but it still really holds up for me.
Yeah.
And certainly her role in it. The last sort of key moment I want to talk about was the Wade Somney run from 2016, 2017. Have you guys read this?
No.
Okay. It's, for me, one of the best Black Widow arcs done yet.
Nice.
I mean, the art is, you can imagine how good the art is.
Was this before or after their Daredevil run?
After.
Okay.
Yeah,
After.
I was gonna
Yep.
say
After. Yep. It explores her going back to Russia and looking into her past and the Red Room, and how she gets entangled with the founder of the Red Room, and also the young girls who are in that program now, or the offshoot of that program. So it really explores her past and her conflicted feelings about that part of her life. There's also a spectacular. It's amazing. A spectacular chase sequence at the beginning where I don't remember why, but S.H.I.E.L.D. sees her as compromised. They're trying to hunt her down. She's flies a motorcycle off like a building. It's phenomenal action artwork. And it shows you the sheer skill of the Black Widow. She's battling multiple opponents and, cars, motorcycles. It's a classic action sequence that really showcases all of her abilities. But Wade also does a wonderful job of really exploring the history of the character, and it's one of the best Black Widow stories I've read. It's 12 issues. it's my highest recommendation.
Putting it on the list.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil too much because maybe people may have read it. None of you guys in the room have read it, but go. I'm sure it's on Marvel Unlimited.
It is.
So
there's actually one of the cool things about Unlimited for anybody who is looking to read her some of her key moments is you can go to the lists category and then go by character, and they have a whole bunch of like key moments that you can scroll through and read specific issues of that character's backstory. And they do have listed like her first appearance, the first appearance in the costume, and they had the Somni run listed there as one of the.
And they probably had Web of Intrigue too. I bet.
I believe they did. Yes.
Yeah, definitely Web of Intrigue and the Wade Somni I would highly recommend.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm a little confused. I'm not sure if this is still current. So Natasha, quote, dies in Secret Empire #7. Her neck is broken. She's killed by the Hydra Captain America, the doppelganger.
Oh, she definitely got better. Yeah, no,
Okay.
there's no way she's still dead, especially if it was Secret Empire, because I think a lot of the ramifications of Secret Empire have been undone.
Oh yeah.
Well, it's still playing out in the Ta-Nehisi Coates Captain America arc because he's
True.
still struggling with the fact that people saw his face as the head of this Hydra plot that took over the United States,
Right.
essentially.
I'm going to look it up, but I'm pretty sure she got better because that seems like a major character death that would never stick. It just
Ian,
seems.
when did you get so jaded and cynical?
When I started reading Marvel comics and everybody's come back to the dead except for Uncle Ben, like that's that's the way it rolls.
Many times.
Exactly. Thank you, 1980s, for bringing Jean Grey back and ruining everything.
While you're looking that up,
Yep.
I want to talk a bit about other media as we kind of wrap this up. Murd, you have stuff in your notes, though. Why don't you fire away on that, buddy?
Okay, I'll fire a few things. A couple of Avengers appearances. She
Please.
made before becoming a regular member. She helped out the Avengers during the Korvac saga.
Yes.
78. And for absent friends here, for Pants's sake, she was one of the characters, one of the reserve Avengers rounded up to appear on The Late Show with David Letterman.
Oh, that's right.
Yes, in the legendary Avengers number 239, which Pants owns a couple times over. I
I'm
think.
sure he does.
And for those who are curious, when she finally became a full-time Avenger, that was in number 329 in 1991, which is part of the Larry Hama and Paul Ryan run.
Wow.
Which also gave us Rage.
Oh, Rage.
Rage.
All right, so that's going on. There were a couple of Black Widow solo and duo graphic novels. You know, she made a lot of appearances in team-up titles like Marvel 2-in-1 and Marvel Team Up.
She did, yep.
In the 70s and 80s, and that tradition kind of continued in the early 90s because she co-starred with a lot of different characters in one-shot stories. She got one all her own in 1990. It was called Black Widow: The Coldest War by Jerry Conway and George Freeman. And then she teamed up with the Punisher in Spinning Doomsday's Web in 1992, with Daredevil in Daredevil Black Widow Abattoir in 93. It was written by Jim Starlin. And
I've read that.
with Nick Fury in Death Duty in 1995. She had a little 3-issue arc in Journey into Mystery when that was an anthology
That's
series
right,
briefly. After Thor disappeared into the Onslaught event, his series reverted to Journey into Mystery. In issues 517 through 519, Natasha infiltrated a group called Freedom's Light, and she disguised herself as the Ebon Flame, which is like the costumed mascot or ringleader of this group, who was actually a fictional character, though Natasha didn't realize that at the time she assumed the identity. And that was written by Scott Lobdell with art by Randy Green. And a favorite of mine, she was a full-time member of the Marvel Knights non-team.
That's right.
Yeah, out of the imprint of the same name, from issue 1 all the way through number 15, alongside her frequent beau and partner Daredevil, and also Punisher and Shang-Chi and Dagger.
And you mentioned Marvel Team Up. I remember she was in a Marvel Team Up with Shang-Chi and I think Nick Fury and I think Spider-Man, if I remember correctly.
Yep, that was a multi-parter, I think.
Yes, it was. It was a multi-parter.
So I have an update, by
Please.
the way, on Black Widow. So the Black Widow that we know and love, the Natasha Romanova Black Widow, is still dead.
Okay.
There's a clone.
A clone now?
There's a clone. because there's always a clone. That apparently Winter Soldier was investigating a death that he thought that only Natasha could pull off after she had been killed. And through his investigation and a bunch of other stuff, they find that there was a clone made by the Red Room
from her genetic material.
From her genetic material of Natasha that's now running around as the Black Widow.
But it doesn't have the memories of the original, obviously. Right?
I think she has different memories. She might have part of her memories.
Okay.
But she's running around as Natasha Romanova.
Okay.
With double F.
That's the name she'd used in the past.
Yep. And that's the one that's still currently wearing the costume, according to the Wikipedias. So if they haven't brought her back yet, but it wouldn't surprise me if somehow they either retcon this or correct it over the next couple of months.
Huh.
Yep.
When is the movie coming out?
The movie comes out
next year,
early next year.
Yeah, I want to say it's like the Black Panther time frame, like the March or
something like that. Yeah. I also have news when you get to other media that you may not have. known.
Any other comments about the comics before we move on to other media?
No, nothing else really. I really appreciate the evolution the character has gone through over the years. You know, that she's now become one of the stronger characters in Marvel, and that she's, a chairman of the Avengers and all this jazz, that she's really proven that she's a lot more than just a spy. She's an actual, well-rounded character that's redeemed herself very well over the years.
And that's what I've appreciated as well. And when I look back at the evolution of the stories, they've taken the spy aspect of her character with her, but they've used it to really make her just a far more compelling and complex character, that aspect of her life. Like I mentioned earlier, and Shane was also gushing about it, the Winter Soldier series that Brubaker did.
That was great.
It was tremendous, really well done. And that centers around her relationship and history with Bucky, going back to the Cold War when he was the Winter Soldier. And they do a fantastic... That's another series I highly recommend. I think Marvel did... Well, again, it's probably online.
Yeah.
But I think did a couple large trades collecting the whole thing. The series wasn't that long.
Yeah.
But it's top notch. That's like if you interested in the Black Widow, that's another series I highly recommend is the Winter Soldier.
Oh yeah, no, I've read it. I read it as it was coming out. It's amazing. Yeah, it's one of my favorite things Brubaker did for Marvel.
Yep.
That wasn't Captain America.
All right, so other media. Now, the first we already talked about the test photos from the 1970s, the TV show that never was, and I got to say, Angela Bowie looks fantastic. I mean, she really looks the part.
Yep.
The poor guy in the Daredevil suit, that's another matter, but she really looks the part. What would that? We know what that show would have been like because we know what the Hulk was like and Spider-Man in the 70s.
I was going to see. I could see the TV movie in my head where the two of them are crossing over. That would have been interesting.
Now, I wanted to, before we get to the opposite of Scarlett Johansson, I want to talk about the classic Avengers cartoon from, was it this decade or the previous decade?
This decade, yeah. Earth's Mightiest Heroes.
Yeah, where one of the most faithful Marvel cartoon adaptations of a comic I've ever seen.
Oh, yeah.
The costumes, the character dynamics, the interplay, the storylines.
Yeah.
And the Black Widow appeared. She had a guest appearance, and they did the whole Hawkeye story and how she was taking advantage of him, but at the same time she fell for him. Have you guys all seen these episodes?
I actually have not.
I've heard nothing but good things, but was it on the Nicktoons channel?
No, it was on Disney XD.
Yeah, Disney XD.
Yeah. The other one.
Here's what I'm going to do.
I don't get it home.
Wait, hold on. I have the whole series on DVD.
Ooh.
Next time I see you,
I can play those.
Next time I see you, they're going to be in your hands.
Awesome.
Yeah. I saw them when they were airing.
As did I.
They're excellent.
I would watch them with my sons. They were younger. I didn't miss them because I was in awe of the attention to detail.
Yeah.
Hawkeye's in his actual costume.
And
they're really fantastic.
And I've seen some
Kang's
of them.
in it.
Yeah. And actual comic writers worked on it.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure Kyle and Yost
he did. Yes, that's correct.
Yep. Worked on it. And
there's a great Black Panther story in it. It's fantastic.
I would go so far to say, Murd, this is as close to the Timverse as Marvel has gotten. Like,
I agree.
Tim
100%.
Verse, like it's that good. as it goes on.
Is that coming to Disney Plus?
That's a very good,
Yeah, that's a
question,
good question.
and I certainly hope so.
Yeah, because there's a lot of other Marvel old cartoons coming to that.
Yes, X-Men the animated series is
Yep.
coming. They didn't. I'm not sure if they mentioned Spider-Man the animated series, but they did mention a bunch of the others. They may have. Yeah.
Well, the Avengers.
And maybe not Spider-Man with the whole Sony thing.
Maybe
Maybe
who
not.
knows?
the Avengers cartoon is cream of the crop.
Yes, it is.
So Murdoch, I could get that in hands. But there's a great Black Widow story in it that really goes into this history.
She's shown up in more recent ones as well, like the Avengers Assemble cartoon.
That I haven't
and
seen.
a bunch of others. Those are okay. Like I
Okay.
kind of never really got into them that much.
So let's close. How do we feel about Scarlett Johansson's portrayal of the character?
Well, actually, hold on. Before we
Please,
do that,
please.
A little bit of breaking news.
Levinstein again.
So it was announced this past Tuesday, as we're recording this, that Marvel is bringing Black Widow, Hawkeye, and Star-Lord to the podcasting world. What? There are going to be scripted podcasts, a 10-episode series featuring Hawkeye, Black Widow, and Star-Lord.
All together?
I'm not sure if they're all together
Okay.
or whether they're going to be standalones for
Okay.
these three that are going to be premiering on Sirius XM and Pandora.
Out.
Yeah, very, very
So
soon.
like radio serials, essentially.
Yes, radio dramas along the
love
lines of what they
radio
did with Wolverine.
Right.
For a couple of years, it was like a year ago or something like that for Stitcher.
I didn't know they did that.
Yeah, they're working on a new one for that as
And
well.
then didn't they do a graphic novel of the Wolverine story?
They may
after
have.
the fact. Okay.
Yeah, The Long Night and The Lost Trail were the two Wolverine ones. But yeah, so she's coming to the podcasting world
Fantastic.
very soon.
Did they say who's playing her?
No real information as of yet, I think, on that. I'm not seeing anything about casting, but yeah, they've been working on this for a while, and SiriusXM representative confirmed to IO9 that their Wolverine podcast will be separate from other Marvel developed from with Stitcher. So yeah, so this is a whole different shebang than the whole Stitcher deal. So
Well, I'm interested to hear that.
yep, and if I find out anything about casting, I'll let you know on a Comic Talk.
Levinstein lives. So, how do we feel about Scarlett Johansson's portrayal of the character? She's played the character in several films now.
Well, when she was first cast, I was a little skeptical, but
Oh, I was ecstatic.
almost right out of the gate with Iron Man 2 and beyond, it was out.
Wasn't she the second choice? I could have sworn that they cast someone and they were unavailable.
Was Emily Blunt the first choice?
That may have been it.
I
Yeah,
think it was.
Yeah, I think so.
She probably would have been great too. She's a great actress.
yeah,
But
yeah.
But yeah,
No.
it far surpassed my expectations.
when they show her battling the henchman at the end of Iron Man 2, I was like, oh, this is it. Like, this is the Black Widow. The combat prowess,
Yeah.
the iciness, almost contempt for her opponents, like when he sprays the guy with the mace, like I said. And then poor Happy punches out one guy. She's
got him!
She's taking out the whole rest squad of henchmen besides.
He's all sweaty and exhausted.
And the costume, the hair, everything was pitch, and the attitude was pitch perfect.
Yeah, she's the best part of Iron Man 2. Like, I mean, the rest of that movie is so-so,
Yeah,
but she's definitely
yeah.
the best
I agree
part.
with that.
I completely agree with that.
And then when she appears in the Avengers, and again they so go to the essence of the character. Coulson's on the phone waiting. She wipes out
This idiot
Russian-
is giving me everything.
I love that scene. Oh, so badly
picks
love
up
that
her pumps
scene.
at the end and walks out. Like it's. Murd, what's your take on her as Black Widow?
As master interrogator,
Yeah.
there, which is, of course, really more up to Joss Whedon for having written the script than for her portrayal, really. But she absolutely always looked the part. She played it with appropriate aplomb and sang-froid.
Fantastic.
The only thing I would have liked better was just a hint of a Russian accent. But it does make sense that as a spy, she would have learned to eliminate that when speaking English a long time ago, so as not to alert people to.
And that's a good point. And there were times where she does reference the fact that she is Russian in the movies. At least one time she notes that.
I feel like she spoke it once.
I'm pretty sure she did. I was just going to say that.
Yeah.
But the scene where she tricks Loki into giving away his entire plot.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that was awesome.
Thank you for your cooperation. And she walks away.
That's
Like Whedon.
that's the
'cause-
Black Widow's truest superpower.
Yeah, and because Whedon is such a fan, and he just understands all the characters so well, and he put key moments into this. So you understand, except for poor Hawkeye, where they really developed the essence of each of those characters very quickly, and that's great writing.
Oh, yeah.
Or I think about how in the last Avengers film, where I think maybe it's Bruce Banner says asks them, do you know anything about physics? And she says something like, well, only enough to have a conversation about
That was Ant-Man. Paul Rudd
Ant-Man.
saying about
Because-
anybody study quantum physics or something.
enough to converse about. Because again, as a spy, she has to play all these roles. I
Yeah.
love those little tips of the hat to that part of her life.
Yeah.
Essentially,
I think my favorite portrayal she had was definitely in Winter Soldier.
incredible.
There were moments of her acting where she came off a little stiff, but that could have just been the directing or the scene in particular. But overall, I think she did a really good job.
Well, in Winter Soldier, again, when they're driving to Jersey in the car,
yeah,
it's some of the best writing.
Oh, definitely.
in the whole film.
Yeah,
and they really understood her character because in that conversation, she's basically explaining to Steve what her life as the Black Widow really is all about, and really, in many ways, how lonely it really is, and also the clear reverence she has for him.
Oh yeah,
because he's what she can never really be.
Yeah,
essentially,
and her pulling up in the car while Steve is having to talk. Hey, old man! Like, that was so
We're gonna
great.
pick up a cup of fossil.
Yeah, but I'll also add that since I mentioned it earlier, I'm glad that in the movies they made it that her and Hawkeye are just friends. That they never had.
Yeah, I like the way they did that too.
Yeah, like because you're thinking that the entire time.
Yeah.
And then when they do the swerve in the second Avengers movie, you're like, oh, so they really are just the best of friends.
Yeah,
and I appreciate that and I respect that decision.
I thought they capture her combat ability very well in the films, like her martial arts prowess
and her stunt double, who I've seen when watching Marvel movies on regular channels, which does happen sometimes. Just throw it on while doing stuff. In commercial breaks, they sometimes have guests talk about things. One of them is her stunt double, and she's phenomenal.
Hell yeah. The scenes in Winter Soldier where she's fighting on the ship and she's like guns with the shoulders and zaps them with the widow's bite. And it's really well done.
Oh yeah.
What do we think about the way they handled her death in the last Avengers film?
I was surprised.
Yeah,
I didn't see it coming. I really thought it was going to be Hawkeye.
I thought it was too, and I'm still a little bit disappointed. I mentioned it when we reviewed the movie in the first place. I'm a little bit disappointed that it felt like the character was finally reaching its potential and becoming the strong character that I always appreciate out of her.
But I think it suited her character in the movie because she ended up being and feeling that was her family.
Right.
And this was the way to safeguard everybody.
Yes.
Sure. Yeah.
And Clint had saved her and offered her a gateway to redemption in the first place.
Right.
I love the little part when they're still up on top of the mountain and they're kind of talking about what each is trying to do. And Clint goes, I don't think we're talking about the same people here.
Yeah.
So the new film, to kind of end with this, is a prologue, correct? That's the premise of it? Back in her Soviet days, essentially?
Yeah, with bits happening present day as well, I believe.
Really?
I don't know if those will include her, or at least if not present day, then shortly before present day.
Okay.
Because I feel like that they've stated that at least parts of it are going to be happening, recent. Whether that's there's been rumors that we may get a scene with Robert Downey Jr.
Oh.
They're just rumors, though.
Right.
Nobody's seen them on set or anything like that to confirm it. But if that's the case, then I would assume it's probably pre-Endgame, but newer than the rest of the flashback.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there's a whole 5-year period where she was running the Avengers in the movie universe.
Sure.
Right.
And I'd love to see that.
Yeah, there's so much they could do with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, any closing comments, brothers?
I think we've wiped all the red from our ledger.
I just love that she's
Well done,
become
Murd.
so well looked at through all these movies that really shone a light on her specifically.
They gave her a good arc. Yeah, they really did.
And of course, in Soviet Russia, Black Widow Comics read you. I had to at least once, just once.
We have more than shot our bolt now, ladies and gentlemen. And
I know what I'm doing.
thank you for tuning in to another installment of our Spotlight series.
Hell yeah,
As always,
man! Thank you, Chris,
damn
for
good
putting
Yes,
it together.
thank you for
Danke.
Brothers?
outstanding orchestration and historicization.
couldn't do
Yes.
without you. And Murd, as always, that yellow legal pad. counting on it. Brother.
Stands ever at your service, guys.
Honored. Thanks, everybody.
Visit us at comicgeekspeak.com. To send an email, the address is comicgeekspeak@gmail.com. To leave a voicemail, the number is 267-702-6642. Stop by thecomicforums.vanillacommunity.com and let us know what you think of Black Widow and correct us on anything that we asked questions about. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook. We would like to thank everyone who contributes to the episode. Send in some Muddle of the Merds. I'm sure they'll be used down the pipe. And as always, we are uniting the world's mightiest heroes, one listener at a time.
You got it on Wednesday, and you was psyched about it, going to the volume up. These guys will talk about it, everything the geeks love. From cakes to laser beams, opinions like the sea.